This is where at home I would clink a fork on a wine glass, but we don't have that at 9 in the morning, so that's new to me. So my name's Kerry Turnbull. I'm pleased to welcome you all to the 8th session of the 2023. You can't hear me? Is that more like it? Okay, I told you, a new medium to me. Wine glass and a fork is my usual way of holding court to a group of people. So, my name's Kerry Turnbull. I'm pleased to welcome you to the 8th session of the 2023 Summer Institute here at College of the Atlantic. The subject today is Psychedelics, Exploring the Mind and Human Health. We'll have two speakers. Manoush Zomorodi will be in conversation with Michael Bogenschutz. She's the host of NPR's TED Radio Hour and has been for many, many years. Michael I've known for about a dozen years. He's a member of the National Institute of Drug Abuse. He's a clinical trials network administrator there. And about a dozen years ago, when I was in conversation with the chair of the psychiatry department at NYU, he said to me, you know, we've got some good people here to study both psychedelics and addiction, and they're closely related subjects. Are psychedelics addictive? Can they cure addiction? It's a very complicated topic. It's going to require a real expert. And he said, there's this guy, Michael Bogenschutz. Now, I had mentioned Michael's name to me. He said, I saw his resume. He's the guy we need. He said, he's not a journeyman ball player. He is like Joe DiMaggio. And I thought, this is what I need. The kind of geek that will call a guy from Harvard Medical School with a research resume the Joe DiMaggio we need. And I thought that is what we need for this very complicated, very edgy topic. And Michael has done us all proud over the last 12 years down at NYU, and he'll be discussing his research there with Manoush. So without further ado, I'll let them come on up here.
I'm so excited to be here, and I've been here all week, and I've been watching all of you, and I spend a lot of time at conferences, as you can imagine, TED, and this has just been such a delightful, warm, nerdy, early rising, late to bed kind of gang. I love that you all are here this morning. I want to thank Darren and Sean and the college for having me. It's been an amazing experience. I won't say trippy, because that's what we're going to talk about. Okay, so Michael, let's hear the story. Psychiatry is your specialty, but particularly psychedelics. How? I mean, because I think of psychedelics more as like Grateful Dead rather than NYU Langone. So.
Yeah. Well, so I've been doing clinical research and mostly in the addiction field for about over 20 years now, and one of the things that has most interested me, from the beginning, is how and why do people change, and how can we actually make that happen? Some people recover spontaneously. Some people never are able to change their behavior, and may die of the consequences of their addiction. And we have treatments that help somewhat, but a lot of it just is things happen, and we don't really necessarily understand why. And we know, one of the things in the addiction field, Bill Wilson's, spiritual awakening is a very famous event, led to the founding of AA. And so, he described this sudden turning point when he felt he was on the mountaintop, and he heard the voice say, you are a free man, and he never drank again. And so that's a very inspiring story. Going back even further, William James studied, he wrote a book called Varieties of Religious Experience, and he spends quite a bit of time talking about these sudden, what he calls conversion experiences. Sure, I can try to get a little closer, and I'll just, how's that sound now? Okay.
Better?
All right, I'll just talk a little louder, that's fine. They're sudden, sometimes out of the blue experiences where people, something happens and they're changed forever, and maybe these things can be described in religious terms, but they also happen, they can be described in purely secular terms. Bill Miller, who was eminent psychologist and one of my mentors at the University of New Mexico in addiction, wrote a book with Janet Siedebakke, which was called Quantum Change. And that book is it's basically a description of just 50 or so people's experience who, out of the blue, had these kinds of experiences. And they weren't necessarily trying to change. They weren't necessarily, most of them did not have any addiction issue. And something would happen. They had a singular experience, and there was this sudden change. And these were not drug-induced experiences.
So had you
Spontaneous
always
experiences.
specialized in addiction treatment?
So, yeah, so I'm an addiction psychiatrist, and so that's been my focus. I've done other, clinical research in people with co-occurring disorders, addiction, and, say, schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, and some other work in personality disorders, but the main thing's been addiction.
So before we get to actual treatment, let's lay out how big the problem is, particularly alcohol addiction, right? That's your sort of focus with these treatments.
Yeah, so, alcohol use disorder is, it's very common depending on how you define it. One of the most reliable surveys that was done recently estimates that 14% of the U.S. population have alcohol use disorder at any given time, and a lot more in the course of a lifetime, and it accounts for about 100,000 deaths annually in the United States alone. And people, when they die of alcohol use disorder, it's not shortening their life by a couple of years. Usually, the average their loss of life years is 26, so they lose 26 years of life. So it really, people lose a lot of life.
Okay, so
Not to mention all the other ways in which people and the people around them are affected by the addiction.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure there's not one of us in here who hasn't in some way been affected by alcohol addiction or knows someone who has. So my understanding was that there was a study that happened in 2006 that made you think, okay, maybe psychedelics are a way to tackle this really big problem from a different angle.
Yeah, that was the 2006 paper by Roland Griffiths and his colleagues at Johns Hopkins University, and it was the first one to come out in the let's say the modern era, since the early 1970s, really, describing the effects of psychedelics in humans. And this was a study in normal volunteers, and they received a relatively high dose of psilocybin or an active placebo that wasn't psychedelic. And over 2/3 of the people receiving the psilocybin reported it was one of the top 5 most meaningful experiences of their life, both personally and spiritually. And that puts that experience in the category of having a first child or losing a parent. They highly, highly significant experiences, and they reported positive change on the basis of these experiences, and their loved ones, family members, corroborated that. They're really nicer to be around. They're more pleasant, more thoughtful. And so I thought, wow, you can actually give these drugs to people in a medical or scientific setting, as I didn't know you could even do that. And 2, even for these people who weren't particularly trying to change or improve themselves in any particular way, the effects seemed to be almost entirely positive. I mean, there was some anxiety and some, difficult experiences, but overall the effects were, almost entirely positive. So that, connected in my mind with what I was talking about earlier and these quantum change events that could potentially trigger, a radical change and dramatic improvement in addiction if we were able to harness that in a reliable and safe way.
Okay, so take us to 2012. You decide to do your own study. with psilocybin. Let's just clarify. Psilocybin, magic mushrooms, same thing, right?
Psilocybin is one of the two main active ingredients in the psychedelic mushrooms.
Okay.
So in all of these, almost all of the studies that have been done, it's synthetic psilocybin that's been made in a lab, highly purified synthetic, but it is the same chemical that's in the magic mushrooms, yeah.
And what was the question that you wanted to solve? Was it that you felt you needed more people, or you wanted to see it for yourself, or particularly to treat alcoholism as
Yeah,
since
the
that's your
idea was,
specialty?
can we develop this, use this as a tool in the treatment of addiction? And there actually had been quite a few studies back in the 1950s and 60s of LSD being used to treat alcohol dependence, and they were somewhat equivocal. The studies were they were kind of small, mostly not the most high quality studies compared to what we do now. But overall, the results were, positive and encouraging, and that whole line of research got shut down, rather abruptly and, in retrospect, prematurely, because of the concerns about misuse of LSD and the association with counterculture and, a lot of the craziness that was going on at that time. But so that provided additional impetus to look at addiction in particular. But so the question for the pilot study was, it's an uncontrolled study. We're just going to treat 10 people and see, do they seem to improve? Do they tolerate the treatment okay? Does it seem to work? And if it is promising, then we'll move on to controlled trials to really see what the effects are.
Okay, I think they've just put up a slide, actually, and you're probably like, why are they showing us random living room furniture? But actually, this is the treatment room, right? This is where you bring people. Talk us through how it works. How does somebody, A, feel like a good candidate for you to do that, and B, how do you convince them to trust you with their brain?
Yeah. Well, so these are clinical trials that we're doing, so everything is, a bit more sort of rigid and specified than it would be in clinical practice if and when we get to that. But for the clinical trials, people will volunteer for the study. Maybe they saw an advertisement, maybe they read Michael Pollan's book, maybe they, heard something else, looked it up on the internet. So they're interested. We explain the risks and benefits. If they're interested, there's a whole screening process to determine whether they qualify, and that would mean not only do they have, the alcohol use disorder, but there aren't any other conditions that would complicate their treatment or complicate the interpretation of the results. So it's a fairly narrowly defined population, but they were all people with, moderate to severe alcohol use disorder. So they qualify for the study. They don't have any physical or mental problems that would prohibit their participating. Then in our treatment model, there are, we call it psychedelic or psilocybin-assisted therapy. So there are 12 sessions of talk therapy or counseling that within which there are the 2 sessions in which the participants receive the study medication, and that the drug sessions happen at 4 weeks and 8 weeks. So there's 4 weeks of therapy, then session 1, 4 more weeks of talk therapy, session 2, 4 more weeks, and then they're done. So the idea is the therapy prepares them. You give them information just about what to experience and how they might, what might come up and how they can deal with that, and how the therapist can help them kind of get through any anxiety or difficult experiences that they're having. And it also serves to get their attention focused on the problem at hand. Reviewing, what are the issues, the problems that the drinking has caused you? What are you concerned about? What would you like to be different? What would you, why is it important to you? How is this drinking conflicting with your values and who you want to be as a person? So all of that is to get them kind of ready to take a deep look at what's going on inside of them.
So you are kind of preparing them to really, I mean, you could think about so many things when you're about to go into this treatment, I suppose, but you're saying, like, let's stay focused on the problem. Let's prepare you as much as you can mentally for whatever's going to happen in this room, and then also building trust, I would think. Is that important, that
Right.
they feel not worried that something awful might happen?
So that's a big part of it. And in my opinion, that's the single most important part about this, is that there's enough of a trusting, supportive relationship that the person feels they can accept support from the therapy team. And I should mention in this study, and in most of the studies that have been so far, it's a team of 2 therapists, which is kind of unusual for therapy. But it's the idea is, you want more than half of the people in the room to be in their right mind, I guess. So it helps. Something might come up, and suddenly, the person is getting paranoid about one of the people, or they remembered something that a man did to them, and there's a man, and there's generally also a woman there, so that might make a difference to them in that context.
Interesting. Okay, so talk us through, we're about to show you someone who's been through this, but before we do that, can you talk us through, like, what is, the day has come, you've done the therapy, you are focused on your problem that you want to solve, you trust your 2 therapists, and then it's treatment day. What happens?
Yeah, so they come to our room here, which is in it's within a hospital setting, but it's, as you can see, it's a sort of living room-like comfortable room. And we do some, medical screening to make sure they're not intoxicated, they're not in alcohol withdrawal, their blood pressure is okay, they're safe. It's safe to give them the medication. And then, usually we start around 9 o'clock, and we ask the person to state their intentions for the day, and then which might be, I'm going to learn something about, that will help me not drink anymore, or
Mission statement.
yeah, and and then we encourage them to kind of let go of that, because it doesn't necessarily work to sit there and go, okay, wait, rigidly focusing on once they're in the experience, we encourage them just to dive in.
Wait, how do you take it?
So it's in a capsule.
Okay.
And you take it with just swallow it down with a few ounces of water. And then it takes effect after about 30, 40 minutes. And during much of the experience, we encourage the patients to lie on the couch, eyes closed, and we'll give them headphones to listen to a program of music and eye shades, so they really are encouraged to focus on their internal experience. And so the therapists in this setting are really sort of ground control. Most of the time there's not active talk therapy going on, because people are not necessarily in a state to talk very clearly about anything, and that's really not the point. The point is to go inward and see what they can find, and then toward the end there might be more conversation going on. If the person has a real rough time and say, I feel like I'm losing my mind, or I can't deal with this, I think I'm going to, or I want to go home, which they can't do. The therapist will redirect them and, wonder what's coming up, and, be curious about that and try to approach that, or help them come up with some way of dealing with that. Sometimes just a little physical touch, hand on the shoulder, or holding the hand for a period of time can really help people move through those experiences, and so not kind of get stuck in some kind of fearful, avoidant kind of stance. So, and more often than not, the person might lie there just for a couple of hours, take a bathroom break, lie there for a couple more hours, and as a therapist, you don't necessarily even have any idea what's going on. I mean, you might, but you really can't tell for the most part.
Wow.
And then at the end, you'll hear something about it, and we'll make sure that people are back to baseline and don't have any residual, really disturbing thoughts or symptoms or anything, which really hasn't been a problem for any of the patients that I've treated, and we send them home with a family member or friend to spend the night with them, just so they have some support if they need to talk or they need somebody to make them a sandwich or whatever.
Can they go to work the next day?
They could. We really encourage people to take some time, to have the next day off, to reflect, and writing things down and journaling is a really good idea, because these, the most intense or meaningful parts of these experiences are usually extremely memorable, and people, it's one of the ways that these treatments work, I think, is that the memory of this, peak experience, or this really singular experience, which gave them a new perspective, it's really a very vivid, deeply held memory, and that can help them to reorganize their behavior over time.
All right, so we're gonna show a video, but just set us up. What are we about to see?
Yeah, so this is an interview with one of our participants in the pilot study named Sarah, who so she went through the whole treatment, and so she'll talk a little bit about what her life was like before the treatment, the preparation, and then the first session, and the second session, and then how her life was different afterwards. And it's one of the interesting things, when you hear about the two sessions, they were very, very different for her, and they complemented each other in a way that was really helpful to her. And that, we sort of suggest to people, we don't suggest specific things about what you're supposed to feel, what you're supposed to learn, but we do, in a general sense, suggest, whatever comes up is what needs to come up. It's coming from inside of you, and so it's the right experience for you to have on that day, and just see what you can learn from it. So, it was a very interesting case, and she's very well spoken, so I think you'll enjoy this.
Great, let's play it.
I drank a lot, and I drank every night after the kids went to bed, just to drink. Wine, beer, vodka, hard liquor. It just grew to become something that really wasn't me, but it just became a habit. I really did not see myself quitting drinking anytime soon, because I didn't think that it was affecting my life that bad. I wasn't realizing just how much it was influencing and taking kind of a control of my life. It really was. It was sad, it was sad to think, wow, and for what? For what? What am I doing this for? Alcohol, every day, everywhere, it just was part of my life. I didn't even know what to expect. I just was kind of like, hey, no big deal. I'm easy. I could do this. I had no expectation, and Michael didn't really even lead me into one. He just said, things may happen, just go with it. The colors and the visual, the images that I was seeing were dark red. I can't even describe them. I've never seen it before, but I thought, this is art that would sell to somebody, because it is strange. A mix of Mayan and tiles that were moving. It was torturous, actually. It hurt emotionally and physically. I needed to acknowledge the hurts that I had personally, and I had to acknowledge the hurts that I had done others. And I wasn't even thinking, why do I drink through all of this? This had nothing to do with it. It just had to do with my lack of gratitude I felt. And I was sad with myself, and I was ashamed of myself. I used to like me, and I stopped. And then I had to say to the older Sarah, that's okay not to like yourself. Admit it, and it's okay, because you want to change. I went from that point to becoming a mother of my children, my beautiful children. And I thought of all the times that I just was not present with them. I was there. I do a lot with my kids, but I was not really there like I should be, like I wanted to be. And that was hard to accept. But I was so grateful that they're little and I have time. And I had seen the light of that, I had seen the difference. Through part of the session, I couldn't see my kids' faces. It was as if I had to work through things, kind of wade through all these different dark emotions, and then I saw them, and I was like, the experience was emotion. I don't think I stopped crying from the time I started the session to the time I ended. Tears just flowed. Had it been a movie, it's a sad, depressing movie, but you don't want to stop watching it, It was sad because I'd gotten so far away from where my true self really should be. And I was alone, and I had taken myself there. That was the sick part, It was all, I did this all to myself. I had to accept and move on, and I did, because I never wanted to stray as far away as I had from who I really am and what I really believe. That first experience was painful. I mean, I felt physical pain, raw, guttural, sobbing emotion, and it really was my life. It wasn't like I was in some, fantasy. This was my life. And as hard as it was then, I'm so grateful for it. I needed to see that. The second session almost felt more like a reward for my hard work. That experience was bright and light and hope. I had those 4 weeks to really kind of process what had happened to me in the first session. 10 years of therapy and, a 3-hour period. When the second session came into swing, all of a sudden I'm seeing this neon green and these bright pinks and white and puffy, pretty little things. And I was like, wow. My world was just this peaceful, babbling brook with a sheen of water just moving, and I was like, okay. And all of a sudden, immediately, the people that I loved were in my face. I didn't have to look for them. They were right there. It really became a journey of God. And it was a journey of love. I loved everyone, including the people I couldn't stand. I found so many reasons to love them, and not even about, I feel sorry for them, or, everybody has some good qualities, even the worst people. It's just we don't see them because the ugly we see it first. But I really started seeing these beautiful qualities in people and thinking, I need to keep this, I need to keep this with me. And it was all about God. It was about the one God. All of a sudden, it was so clear to me that all these religions and all this information out there, spiritual information, is really coming from the same place. And I was so happy. I was so happy to just be able to accept that. And it was a place of peace that I'll know till the day I die. I think religion can be scary for people, spirituality, but really in that moment it was just nothing but peace. And it's still with me here in this very moment. I forgot that I was an alcoholic. And I think what I found was I was just kind of an unhappy person. And I didn't really have any good reason to be. I just sort of got there.
Should we stop there? Or do you guys want to see more? Sarah's awesome, right? Don't
It
you
has
want to hang
changed
with
me.
Sarah now?
I
I
did
do. I want to pause there because she says in the second section, she says, 2 years of therapy in 3 hours. It's very efficient. What do we know? What is happening in the brain?
Yeah, well, that's been kind of a quip that people have said, 5 years of therapy in a day or whatever. And, I don't want to make any claims like that, but that is sometimes what people report, is that, a lot happens in a very short period of time. What we know about what's going on in the brain is while people are under the influence of the drug, the usual functional canonical networks of brain activity in the brain that underlie just basic functions of the brain, like paying attention or getting ready to do something or shifting attention, or those networks, which are usually tightly organized pattern of communication, they become much more loosely organized, and there's more crosstalk between these different modes or networks. So in a very literal sense, connections are being made that are not ordinarily happening. And if a person were to have ingrained patterns of thought or brain activity that are problematic and underlying a chronic condition like alcohol use disorder or depression, say, that might be useful just to experience that state of not having those patterns going on. And it may also mean that once you come down off of the experience, that those patterns have been weakened in some way. And so a lot has been said about the psychedelics induce neuroplasticity, which means change within the brain, and that's true. But a dose of cocaine would also induce neuroplasticity. Watching a movie would induce a certain amount of neuroplasticity. So it's true, but that doesn't go very far in explaining what's going on. But very recently there's been some work to show that it's not so much that the drug changes the brain, but that it changes the ability of the brain to change in particular ways. So it's, people call this metaplasticity. So it's a change in the change that can happen. And so these treatments, and in animal models this has been shown to be true, at least under some circumstances, they allow the brain to, it opens a window of opportunity in which new behaviors can be learned.
And from what you've seen, how long does it last? I mean, she feels great. She feels in control of her life. She feels grateful. But is this, how do we know that this is something that isn't just she's gonna fall back into old patterns?
So in the alcohol work, we followed people out to 7 months after their second psilocybin session in the double-blind trial that we did, and there doesn't seem to be any appreciable decrease in the effect that people have over that period of time, at least. So 7 months after the last dose of psilocybin, the people who received psilocybin, 48% of them did not have a drink during that month. 7 months later, 24% of the people who just received the therapy were abstinent during that month. So almost half, and twice as many as the people who received placebo, who also received this therapy. I mean, it's important to know that therapy does help people change their drinking, and in the both the pilot study and the double-blind study, everyone received that therapy, and they benefited. They decreased their drinking by about 50%, and the people who received psilocybin decreased their drinking by about 75%. So,
those are huge numbers, by the way, right? Can you put that in? I love how Michael's like so even and calm, and you're like, yes, I will go wherever you take me, Michael. But just like get excited for a minute, because those numbers are big, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, the effects are probably at least twice what they are of any of the currently approved treatments that we have, and the several things about this as a treatment are exciting. I mean, one is that that the effect seems to be larger than, I mean, we hope, we'll have to demonstrate that further, but the effects seem to be robust. They seem to persist after, for months after you stop the treatment. Other medications, we don't even expect them to work after you stop taking the medication.
So something is happening that is fundamentally changing? Well, it's tricky. It goes back to the crows, right? Like, everything goes back to the crows as far as I'm concerned. For those of you who are here, wow. But this idea of like, are we changing how we see the world? Are we actually changing the structure of the brain? Something is happening, but we don't really know what, right? It might be all those things.
Well, and I think it could be a different things for different people, because even if you're talking about alcohol use disorder, I mean, people drink, for different reasons, and there are, a number of different things that happen to people's brains that can cause them to become addicted, and as a consequence of addiction. And so there are problems with mood and emotion. There are problems with impulse control and cognition, and there are the problems with motivation of like seeking the drug above all else and treating other things as less important. So those are sort of the three big areas, and it could be different for different people. And the experiences that people have certainly are very, very different. But we've, in a fair number of these patients will be in touch a year later, up to 5 years later. And of course, those are the ones who are doing well. But they're, at least out of the, 48 people we treated with psilocybin in the control trial, we've heard back from, probably 10 of them, and they're just, it's not a problem anymore.
It's amazing. All right, we're going to take questions, so get yourself ready. I do want to ask one more before we turn it over to you all. I know, dude, I'm with you. I have like pages and pages, right? I know, we need 3 hours here. We need to spend 8 hours with Michael on his couch is what I want to do. Okay, wait, so I don't think I qualify, though. That's a whole nother conversation. In all seriousness, though, to get it from being in your clinic to being accepted, there's a huge societal, cultural mind shift that has to happen before this can be considered treatment. And there's also has to be way bigger clinical trials to get to approval, FDA approval. So where are you in that?
Well, as far as the FDA approval is concerned, there are, so we did the first, good-sized double-blind study, which was published last year, and I said a little bit about those results. The next step would be to do a much larger multi-site trial, and so we're in the process of raising the money for that, and simultaneously with that, one piece of good news is that the National Institute of Health, which really had not been interested in psychedelics until quite recently, are now interested in funding research in this area. So we're going to also do some work, smaller studies focusing on the mechanisms of how it works, using the functional neuroimaging, not during the session, but before and after to see what are the persisting changes. And so, so we really, it's proven, challenging to raise money for addiction studies, more so maybe than a depression, which, is a less stigmatized illness. So, so hopefully there'll be people who are interested in step up and fund some of those, that larger study. For major depression, with psilocybin, there are at least 2 organizations that are ready to move into phase 3 trials. So those are the studies, the final studies that are done to convince the FDA that the drug is safe and effective. So those studies are starting or about to start, and will take at least a couple years to complete. The other drug, which we don't really have time to talk about, and it's a different drug, but MDMA, which is classified as a psychedelic. The phase 3 studies for MDMA in the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder have been completed, and the results were strikingly positive, and that package of information will be submitted to the FDA hopefully later this year, and so we could see approval of of MDMA for PTSD, within a couple of years if things go well.
So I had the pleasure of interviewing Rick Doblin, who's in charge of that study. So if you list, there's a link in your program to the TED Radio Hour where we talk about MDMA for PTSD, if you're interested. He's a fascinating guy. Okay, great. Let's do questions right here.
So you were just talking about depression and psychedelics. What do you have to say about microdosing in everyday life in order to function for an individual who is bipolar or,
You're saying just for someone who maybe doesn't have a diagnosis, but is
yeah,
looking
for someone who's
to-
just living life, and whether or not they understand what is happening in their brain, they turn to, let's say they start with alcohol, and then, that's not, so they go to psychs.
Yeah. Well, the microdosing, there's been a lot in the press about this, and a lot of people who have, reported it's been beneficial and enthusiastically, promoted this. As far as scientific evidence, it really there haven't been any studies to show whether that works. So it's very speculative. It's an interesting thing, and if you could get the benefits without having these very intense experiences, that might be, some people might want to have the intense experiences, but other people might just want to feel better, and that would be, that would be great if it would work, although you'd have to keep taking it over a period of time. So it's a very different model. It'd be a little more like a regular antidepressant, and it just hasn't been studied, so I can't, can't say whether that's going to be helpful or not.
Right, wherever the mic is. There we go.
I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the treatment, in theory, is available to pick up in a field behind the liquor store for somebody who is struggling. And I'm wondering how you see, or what the biggest pitfalls for having a plant, or a fungus actually, be dragged into the medical system, and whether you see somebody patenting it and charging $20,000 for the treatment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so there are two sort of parallel processes going on here, and they seem to kind of overlap, but to my thinking, it helps me to think, in general, I don't think this way, but in this case, I think it's helpful to just think a little bit rigidly, categorically. We have a medical model, and the medical model is you do all of this testing of safety and efficacy, and if you can demonstrate that the drug is safe and effective, then, and only then, you can use it as a medical treatment. So for a state to say, we want to let people use this, just as they did with medical marijuana, you can calling it medical doesn't really make it medical. It means that the state is saying, you can do this, and we think it's going to help you. So I don't know that it's the state's place to say that, but in any case, that's to call it medical. I think So we're on this. So I'm a medical researcher. We're doing studies within that medical model to see if we can use psychedelics effectively to help people with medical conditions within that medical model. On the other hand, it would be ludicrous to think that the medical field is going to bottle up these substances and no one else is going to be able to take them. And as you said, they probably grow in the field right outside of here if you knew what you were looking for. So the question there is, people can make their own decisions about things. Society and government can decide, do we think that people should just be allowed to do this, or do we want to decriminalize it or not? And those are really different questions from the medical question. It has to do with civil liberties and what and overall benefits and harms, and so it's a really very different set of arguments, and whether people should use them for for personal growth or for dealing with things that aren't diagnosable disorders. So For me, it's helpful to keep those things very separate, and I think that the answers could be very different.
But we do see, I mean, certainly in the tech world and in the medical world, we see a lot of startups being spun out of work done at academic institutions, and we certainly live in a capitalist society. And so the industrialization of treatment, or whether that's recreational or not, is something that is on the horizon, would you say?
Well, I would. The commercial interest is more in new compounds that can be patented, and although there are people who are trying to get use patents for psilocybin under certain conditions, but it's kind of hard to see how you could think that you own that, right? But if it's a new compound, then you could patent it and get exclusive marketing and so forth. So that's where people, in a for-profit model would be looking. And there's a lot of interest in, so-called non-psychedelic psychedelics. If you could find something that doesn't have the subjective effects that did the same thing, that would be a lot easier to use. And, and that's true. And that could be, in many ways, a good thing. I'd be surprised if you could find a drug that had all of the effects that the psychoactive psychedelics do, because I think that a big part of what drives the change is these experiences and the memories of the experiences and the meaning of the experiences. So we'll see how far that goes. But people will try to make money off of this like they would off of anything else, and at the same time, people will be doing what they've been doing for tens of thousands of years, and probably a lot of new things that they're thinking of right now.
Yes.
Hello. Is this thing on? Okay. You guys can hear me good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for the thoughtful conversation. So my first question is, one, I see you got Birkenstocks there. Have either of you tried magic mushrooms? What's your ritual? Is it a therapeutic thing? Do you go hiking, go to a reggae show? What's your thing? And then my second question is, you mentioned you had a very small, this one's for Michael, you had a very small population of people that you included in your initial clinical trial. Just wondering how much diversity there was in terms of gender, age, ethnicity. Do you plan to expand? What's your sort of strategy there? And then thirdly, I kind of agree with this gentleman in the back. Both, Jimi Hendrix and, Jerry Garcia would be very disappointed about the, psilocybin being taken over the goal line by Big Pharma. And I wonder how you guys are going to just navigate that whole space and communicate that in the future. But thank you.
You go first.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll start with the first one. So there's no good answer to that question, right? Because if I say, if you've had these experiences, some people are going to think, well, you drank the Kool-Aid and you can't be objective as a scientist, and you're going to be the next Timothy Leary, right? Don't want that. And on the other hand, if you say, well, I haven't, then other people are going to say, well, you don't know what you're talking about, So I think, how could you hear about and study these experiences and not be curious about them, right? At the same time, when subjective experience, teaches you things that nothing else can, but it can also, for scientists, there are real risks involved and for therapists too, because people will tend to generalize from their own experience, and that colors what they think is going on with the other people. So you see this in therapy all the time. People, kind of project their own experience onto. People used to think that you had to be in recovery to treat somebody with alcoholism, and it's not true. That's been definitively shown. So I think it's a complicated question, but I think there are risks either way you go. So that's my answer to that one, and. And then, wait, what was the second one?
Diversity.
Diversity. Yeah, that's a great question, and that is a real issue with almost all of the psychedelic research that's been done. I mean, in New Mexico, actually, I mean, it was 10 people, but we did have a pretty diverse sample with you know, Hispanic people. In New Mexico, we were able to recruit a pretty diverse sample with that small study. But in the randomized trial, you know, we were getting people who'd read Michael Pollan's book and were looking us up on clinicaltrials.gov. And so we did get a, you know, it was, you know, I mean, about 20% of the sample were not, you know, non-Hispanic white people. But over a third were women, and that's less of an issue in this case. But the MAPS, the second of those phase 3 studies that MAPS did with MDMA, we were one of the sites in both those studies, and there was a real push to increase the diversity in that sample, and it was successful. But it has taken work. I think now that, you know, there's more people are interested in this, and recruitment is probably less of an issue. It may be less of an issue, yeah.
Well, okay, so to answer your question for me, I mean, this sounds amazing, right? Like, I want to do this because I want to go on a journey. I also want to, well, no, I don't want to climb in the caves. I don't want to do that. But Andaman Islands, sure, maybe from a distance. I feel like that's been the theme this whole week, right? Like, where do I want to go and see something and understand the world in a way that will completely change me? And this actually seems accessible in many ways, but I don't think I would qualify. I had postpartum depression pretty badly, and I think I'm very neurotic. So, right? Would you be like, no?
Well, not for this studies, but, you know, there continue to be quite a few studies that are for, you know, so-called, you know, healthy, normal volunteers.
Really?
So you'd have to see if you qualify for that.
All right.
But and, you know, and all other kinds of different indications. So, you know, again, this is, you know, it's, you know, I know it's reductionistic and rigid and narrow in a certain way, but I think that the people who want psychedelics to be understood and valued, and perhaps even, you know, legalized. If you want those things, I think you should be very grateful to the scientists who have been, you know, upping the profile and emphasizing and elucidating the positive value of these substances. And that doesn't mean that we're going to go say everybody should take these whenever they want, because that's just not what we do. But somebody else can do that if they want to.
I should mention both my parents are retired psychiatrists. So, yeah, anyway, okay, where is the microphone? Right there, great. Hi.
Hi. Thank you, Michael, for enlightening us here. The question I have, could you give us a little more details on the 2 studies that you referred to on depression?
Yes, so the question was about the studies that you referred to. Are you talking about the one that his latest that he published?
You just referred to 2 studies on depression that are
on
in
depression,
depression
sorry.
studies, yeah. So there have been, I was talking about the phase 3 studies that are yet to come, and those would be the studies that would be submitted to the FDA to try to get the drug psilocybin approved as a medication for depression. But there's already been 4 or 5 randomized controlled trials of psilocybin for depression, and a few more of psilocybin for people with anxiety and depression facing a life-threatening illness, existential distress. And they've been really uniformly very positive. Most of the depression studies have used just a single dose, and they're seeing large differences in depression symptoms versus placebo, and not necessarily persisting for quite as long as what we're talking about here. And that may be because of the treatment models. It may be because depression's just different. Some of these people are very chronically, you know, severe treatment-resistant depression. Or it may be yeah, it may be that that's just not, depression's a little bit different, or maybe if the treatment model's a little different, we will see these longer lasting effects more reliably. But the effects are large, they're consistent, and it looks good going into the phase 3 studies. And again, I didn't really talk about this, but in terms of risks, these drugs were classified as, by the DEA as Schedule 1, dangerous substances of abuse with no medical benefit. In these controlled trials, the risks are really not very large and easily managed. I mean, not that there couldn't be a rare case of somebody really having something serious happen, but the overall risk profile it's very benign. These are safe drugs relative to other, in relation to other drugs that have been approved.
Great. Great.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
What was the dose, and did people say that they felt complete 7 months later, or would want to do it again?
Yeah. Yeah, good question. So the doses were in the control trial that we did, we dosed on a weight basis. So let's just say a 70 kilogram person would have received 25 milligrams of psilocybin in the first session, and then either 30 or 40 in the second session, depending on how strong a response they had in the first session. So those are, it's kind of hard to translate into grams of mushrooms because they're not, uniform, but maybe 3 to 5 grams of pretty strong mushrooms.
Great. Right there.
Thank you so much. This is fascinating. I'm curious about other possible indications for this down the road. You've talked about PTSD and alcoholism and what was the other one? Depression, sorry.
Yeah.
Are there other possible uses that scientists are starting to think about we want to explore?
Yes, so for psilocybin, there's interest in, in anxiety disorders such as obsessive compulsive disorder, other kinds of anxiety disorders. I mentioned the existential distress, like basically confronting death and having which you could think of as maybe an adjustment disorder. Everybody has to confront death, but it's challenging and could be, can be really very difficult for some people, especially if it's sort of coming earlier than one might have hoped. There's also, interestingly, psychedelics have effects in headache. So there's active research on psilocybin as a treatment for migraine and cluster headache. They have anti-inflammatory properties. So this is where the microdosing could actually come in, because at very, very low experiential doses, psychedelics have strong anti-inflammatory properties that could be useful. Could be. I mean, this is just, we haven't been shown at all, but for a variety of inflammatory conditions. So there's that. That's a lot of them. Eating disorders, personality disorders are, on the list, but haven't really been explored experimentally.
Great.
Quick question about the process. So here to date, AA has been probably the most successful self-help for alcoholism. So in looking at your presentation, there seems to be 2 components. One is the medication, and 2 is the process. Mm-hmm. So the 4 weeks leading up to the first dose and the 4 weeks after to the second. Do you ever see those 2 being separated? Or how important do you think the process is as it relates to the drug? Because, again, self-help is such a critical component. So I think a lot of people look at this and say, well, could I just take the drug and solve my own problems?
Yeah.
Do you think that the therapeutic aspect is equally or more important, or 50-50, or any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And so I'll tell you what I think and what I don't know. But what I think is that especially for the longer lasting effects, we're talking about, months and months or years or a permanent change. I think that the therapy and the, as well as the intention of the person and the focus and the efforts that they're making to change their behavior are going to be critical. That may or may not be true if it's being used like a treatment for depression where, you take the drug and it kind of does something to your brain and it helps you with your depression for, maybe it only works for a month or something. So I think there's a component of this that's, can be explained in straightforward biological terms, that you're kind of shaking up the brain in a way that's helpful in these cases. But that especially for the longer lasting effects, there's an interaction between this, what I call the metaplasticity, this opportunity for learning and change, and the efforts that are made to learn and change in some kind of therapeutic or self-help context. And I don't have any reason to believe that there's some particular, brand of therapy or kind of help or support that would be necessary and be the best one. I think, this could be, Bill W. actually wanted to make this part of AA, and the AA board, on the basis of his own experiences. He was curious, he experimented with LSD in the late 50s. He said, this is just like my experience. This would be so useful for these alcoholics in AA who are struggling to get the spiritual part of it. And the AA board shot that idea down. They thought he was kind of losing it, but he was interested in that. And so in terms of bringing these treatments to scale, because, the therapy is, and these day-long 2-on-1 sessions, it's labor intensive. So there's interest in, obviously, in finding more efficient ways to do that and have it still work. And so group therapy or self-help could certainly be a part of that. And I think, we also have to be careful with the pressure to reduce costs that we don't lose the efficacy and the safety that we get from the way that we've been doing it.
And I think to your point, this must be very expensive. And so Michael was just at the largest psychedelics conference, I think ever, that has ever happened.
I think so.
In Denver earlier this summer. And of course, treatment like this is still illegal, or it is illegal to take psychedelics on a federal level, but states, I think Colorado has already passed it, Oregon, those two are always up there. They is also on there. So do you suspect, is it worrying to you that perhaps we'll see people read your results and think, well, we can't afford to do this kind of treatment, but maybe we can take matters into our own hands?
It is worrying to me, and I want people to understand that you can't extrapolate, both the efficacy and the safety that we've demonstrated in these tightly controlled trials to a different setting where people haven't been screened in the same way, haven't been prepared in the same way, aren't working with somebody who is a licensed therapist, doesn't have medical backup on board and medications available if they have a crisis, doesn't necessarily know what to do if somebody has psychotic symptoms or becomes suicidal at some point in the experience. And so these things, they're very manageable with a strong clinical system like we have. But if you're taking it outside of that, the risks will be greater. I don't know how much greater, but I do worry that people could be harmed and that could set the whole enterprise back. And so that's another reason I keep kind of coming back to there's medical model and there's things that people do outside of that, and we need to. I'm not passing judgment on what things that people do outside of that, but I'm saying I want to be clear that that's not treatment as we understand it within the medical model.
Great. I think we have time for a couple more questions. Yes, sir.
Thank you. William James, Carl Jung, Bill Wilson brought us to the reality that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And the work of James Doty, neurosurgeon at Stanford University, the Dalai Lama, and you need need to work together because you're right on the edge of the total solution. The questions that are asked about the drug are not half as important as the souls of the people involved. And the combination of the alphabet of the heart and the science that you're working on is unbelievably wonderful for humanity. I'm a flower child of the 60s. I started there in San Francisco, and I'm still alive. The Loyalty of the Soul is a book that all should read and gain from, as well as there's so much that we can do out of the realm of economics and making a buck. What you have there is in your work is so important for us to deal with the neural pathways. The science is out there, and it's being developed. And I think that you're doing great work. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'd also like to know if you attack the time around the patient as well as the drug, because the drug is pretty, you know a lot about it. But the people, as far as handling the people, is the big question. Because we could do this at a non-drug, a non-institutionalized phase if we mature.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks for your comments, and I think this work obviously does touch on a lot of, much larger issues, and, in the Sarah video, her experience of this was, clearly she had a very direct experience of this, connection between everyone and everything, and that is, my belief is that is a big part of how these drugs work in a clinical context to help people, heal. We can't help noticing that, humankind needs a lot of help to, figure out some very basic issues about how we get along with each other and the planet and survive. So I certainly agree that those perspectives are what we need, and they're not only achievable through these experiences, but with the drugs, but it for many people it does seem to get people in touch with something that they had lost touch with before. So that's.
Well, I think I'd love to ask, do we have time for one more? One more.
Sure.
Hi. Not to be Debbie Downer, but out of the research trials, how many people had negative effects? So you said 75% saw a reduction in alcohol consumption or elimination of that, but then did you have issues with people, like you say, having a psychotic reaction or suicidal reaction to it? I love this, and I hope it's a thing that fixes everything, but I also worry that, for some people the effects could be quite negative.
Yeah. Well, you're right to be concerned about that, and I think, all of us are. And as physicians, it's first do no harm is the first thing that you promise as a physician. So we did not have any real persistent adverse effects in any of the patients in the trials that I've done. There were a couple of I guess, 3 cases when somebody, including kind of the whole study, people who became so anxious and frightened, panicky, that we gave them benzodiazepine, basically Valium, to help them calm down, and that worked fine. There was one person who really started to have some paranoid thinking and was uncomfortable, and we ended up giving that person a single dose of an antipsychotic, and she was back to normal within an hour and a half, and there were no persistent adverse effects of that. But it doesn't mean that there couldn't be longer-term adverse effects to somebody at some point, and with any drug, there usually are. So that's again why the screening and the medical support. If we hadn't been able to assess and deal with those situations, that's the kind of situation where things can really go bad if people are in an unsafe situation and they don't have the support. So yes, I think it's very important for us to always be trying to minimize the risks and make sure we're not hurting people.
I wonder if I couldn't be a little self-indulgent and ask you to leave us with some thoughts about our internal state of being, because I think this is something that we're seeing everybody needs, and that seems to be what you're saying, that this drug can bring people. But is there a need for us all to be, mindfulness is one thing that people talk about. I'm working on a project about interoception, our ability to monitor our internal functions and how that affects our well-being. I just wonder if we walk out of this tent and we decide not to go into our backyard, into that man's backyard, what is something we can do to bring ourselves the joy that seems to come with some of this treatment for some people?
Yeah. Well, that's a big question. I think you saw again in the Sarah video, when she talks about this experience and the sense of peace and connection, and that everybody's talking about the same thing and their idea of the divine, and she's just, it's there. It's just right. She still has a connection to that. So these experiences are, they do change people. It would be great if we had other ways that we could reliably do this. And there are techniques like breath work that have been developed to try to capture some of the same things, and all of the traditions of meditative practice. There's a lot of different types of that with the different kinds of goals, but that is certainly one kind of meditation practice to experience that connection and oneness. And so that's something, but that is a lot of hard work. I think, connection it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be everything all the time. Connection can be as simple as, just paying attention to your cup of coffee, or it can be paying attention to the person who's sitting across the table when you're having that coffee, and just really noticing what's going on. So that's easier said than done, but it really is right there all the time. So there's nothing that's stopping us from coming back to our senses and noticing what's going on and who we are and how we're part of this. So,
thank you. That's a beautiful place to leave it. Thank you. Great.
Michael, I can neither confirm nor deny whether there are psilocybin mushrooms growing on the COA campus, but genius response to Keolu there, I thought. I just wanted to thank Carrie and Claudia Turnbull for bringing Michael to us. Thank you. And Many of you will remember 2 years ago, where we had the chance to engage with Michael Pollan also, and Carrie and Claudia helped Michael get to the COA campus, so it's really remarkable. One of the things I just want to leave you with is, Michael referred to psilocybin as a tool, again, in the treatment of addiction. We've talked about tools last night in the hand of Homo naledi. We talked about the New Caledonian crows, and this idea of tool keeps coming back again and again and again. Tonight at 5, when we hear from Sylvia Earle, I think she'll say that, one of the most powerful tools when exploring is actually human consciousness and our own sensory experience. And I just plead with you to come back at 5 to hear Dr. Earle talk. And thanks all of you. And I hope you enjoyed the wonderful pitter-patter on the tent, and that was calming. But have a great day, and we will see you at 5.